everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jeannie Zames, and I'm Director of Growth Marketing at Alchemer. I'm very excited to be joined by our panelists, Alan Weber and David Roberts. Alan is Vice President of Customer Experience Applications at IDC. David is CEO at Alchemer, formerly Survey Gizmo. These two colleagues have an amazing depth of knowledge and insight regarding voice of the customer, industry trends, and where the market is going in these unprecedented changing times. We will have time at the end for questions and answers. If you do have a question at any time during the presentation, please just submit them via chat. This should be a very interesting discussion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and glad you can make it here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and start walking through this. It's 2020, and we always have the joke about, hindsight is 2020. And as we look at this year, I'm not sure anybody wants to look back at it, but when you think about what's happened in customer experience just in this year and what's been forced to change as we've gone through a primarily physical to a primarily digital world, the change has just absolutely been incredible. And so what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about rethinking the customer experience and some of the key technologies that underlie that, which I think, with Alchemer are a key piece of where this company is going and where the whole marketing is going. When we really think about it, customers have really created the experience economy. And this is prior to COVID and even more so post-COVID. 73% of customers we found in our research say a brand experience is the key to brand loyalty. And, when you think about what's a good experience, it's something that makes you want to come back. It's something that you enjoyed. It's something that perhaps made you smile a little bit. Something that says, this is why this relationship with this vendor is important to me. But the fascinating thing about this is that if somebody comes back, that's loyalty. And loyal customers are 5 times more likely to purchase from the same company again, which is critical because as we've found out during this whole COVID-19 thing, is it's a whole lot easier, to maintain and keep a customer than it is perhaps to try to get a new customer back. And so that's a huge problem that people need to realize is just what role loyalty has. But beyond loyalty and customer experience, beyond loyalty and what consumers say the experience should be, is when customers have an experience, they tell 9 people about a positive experience, only 9. When you look at our social media platforms and everything that's out there, it's not a lot. If I post on social media, that's a couple hundred people that see it, but they'll specifically go tell somebody 16 people about a negative experience and what happens with that. And so they've created this whole experience economy. And when you look at it, we've had to respond to this. Companies have had to invest in technology to respond to this. In 2020, we did a survey at the end of actually 2019 that said, okay, so where are companies investing their money? And what we found is that companies expected to spend $1.4 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, to digitally transform the enterprise. Any idea where the top areas of investment were, or are, I should say? Well, if you guess customer experience was the top one, you're right. 33.7%, almost 34% of companies that we interviewed, and we had a global survey, and it's end of 2,195. 34% said customer experience was their number one investment for technology. But if you look down this chart, you'll realize that a number of these different areas also touch on customer experience. When you look at marketing, that's customer experience. You look at sales, that's customer experience. Even finance is customer experience. Think about it for a second. If you get a credit card bill and the credit card bill is wrong and you have to call in and get it fixed, like I just recently had to do, man, that is a customer experience, especially if it doesn't go right. So customer experience is a huge investment area for technology. And it's become even more urgent with COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19, we do IDC, we do a lot of surveys. When you looked at the 9 future enterprise agenda elements where companies were going to invest their money and where the C-suite, the board was focused on, the number one was digital trust programs, which makes sense. Everybody was worried about cybersecurity. However, post-COVID-19, we did this one in May. The first one was done in February, so we did this one in May. Companies are starting to feel the impact of COVID. Bam! Customer experience goes from number 8 to number 2. And guess what? It's maintained a number 2 or number 3 position through all of 2020 since May, because companies understand that they have to do everything they can do to maintain their touch with customers. So customer experience is important, but you've got to take into account what's happened in the last year. And what's really happened in the last year is we've seen a forced digital transformation for companies that were probably not ready for it. At IDC, one of the terminologies that we use is the digital underbelly. And these are companies that have exposed their digital underbelly that said, yes, we've done digital transformation. We're ready for digital transformation. And then COVID-19 hit, and guess what? They weren't ready. They didn't have everything in place, and they weren't prepared. And so what we've decided to do, what we did coming into this, and we've thought about this, is we've put together what's called the future of customer and consumer defined. This is where the market's going. And I want to kind of lay this out for you a little bit, because I think it's important to understand the framework that I look at the world through when it comes to customer experience. And what the future of customer and consumer is it's an empathetic relationship between customers and brands. Empathy, not that touchy-feely stuff that you learned about in psychology class in college, but really the ability to use technology to understand the contextual situation somebody else is in. Okay? Second, it's about what the customer wants and how they want to be treated. I mean, this is critical. It's what the customer wants and how they want to be treated. And let me tell you, every customer is like a diamond. They have multiple facets, and they want to be treated in one part of the situation one way, and they want to be treated a different way in another way. For example, you go in and buy a car, you want to be treated in one way. You go in and take the car in to get it serviced, you want to be treated a different way. So it's what the customer wants and how they want to be treated, and it's contextual. Third, it's through the technology. Everything, when you really think about it, we're on Zoom today, we're on a webinar today. Everything happens through this lens of technology, and that's really around awareness, engagement, learning, and measurement. So let's break this down a little bit, because I think this is important. Customer obviously sits at the center, and this is the most important piece, because this is what companies exist for. But the first thing they want to be able to do is they want to be able to have a conversation. You want to be able to have that back and forth with that company, with that brand, with that relationship. But they want a clear customer journey that goes along with that, so they know where they're going, what are the next steps, why things have to play out the way they do. They want an experience. Why is Disney so popular? It's not because of the $4 Cokes you have to buy every time you go to Disney World. It's because the experience you get there. When you look at the launch of Disney Plus, what was so great about the launch of Disney Plus? It was the experience. Why? Because they understood what their customers wanted. And fourth, it's that satisfaction. It's that ability to express how they feel, either positive or negative, back to the company. But that's just the inner circle. Next is the technology. And if you look what's happened, if you look around the customer, you'll see that a data halo has grown around the customer, because every customer, whether they intend to or not, are constantly creating data, whether it's direct from the customer data, for example, filling out a survey or touching that little button or something like that, or whether it's indirect data that we gather from other ways, other forms, contextually about the customer that comes together. But beyond that data is a whole layer of technology. So for example, contextual awareness. This could be everything from some of the intelligence gathering that's happening about the customer and how this actually fits in, to the use of IoT devices, or maybe it's cookies on a website. All this gives us contextual awareness about what's going on around that customer, around that conversation. Next is frictionless. We hear about this all the time when it comes to customers. They want frictionless. Yeah, maybe, perhaps. In most cases, they probably do. What they don't want is they don't want the bumps in the road. They don't want the barriers. So make sure the barriers are taken out. And we use technology to make that easier, whether it's web design, whether it's more intelligence about what the customer is looking for. That's what the journey is all about. So it's that frictionless engagement. And then there's active learning. Again, this is another intelligence piece, is we're learning more about the customer and about their experiences as we go along. And then last is sentiment measurement. And we're all familiar with NPS scores, but it's really so much more than NPS scores. It's all the other types of measurements, both direct and indirect, and quantitative and qualitative, that go around the customer. And when you look at this, you're like, okay, yes, it makes sense. Here's the customer, here's the technology. Well, the third part of this is this leads to business outcomes, which is what the business wants. This is, when you think about it, every part of this is a relationship. So both sides need to get a benefit. It has to be, to quote the great Stephen Covey, it has to be a win-win for both sides. Otherwise, it's not going to continue. So what does the company want? They want that predictable communication. They want to know that their emails have been opened. They want to know that when a customer reaches out to it, that the communication is going to the right person at the right place at the right time. They want to build out that lifetime value. Remember the way we talked about loyalty? They want to build out that lifetime value and say, we want to be able to provide a long-term value to you and keep you around for a customer. Again, we're getting back to the implied intelligence, because not only do we learn about the customer, we learn about everything that's around them. We learn about their cohort, about their family, their friends, their social groups. We want to bring them in as customers also. So it's that implied intelligence. And lastly, this is critical because so many companies violate this. It's that building out that mutual trust, because once we can trust the customer, once the customer can trust us, then we go back to loyalty. So this is our framework that we pull this all together. And so much of this, I hope you've listened to what the words I've been using, because I've been very careful about this. So much of this has an intelligence aspect to it, because actually knowing and understanding is critical to all of this. So when you look at this, what does this mean for companies when it comes to goals? Where is it we're headed? 31% of companies have said that, they want to use this intelligence, this information, this framework to better retain customers. 35% have said they want to improve CX metrics. Why? Because now corporate boards are paying attention to things like NPS scores, customer satisfaction scores. You want to know who's really paying the most attention? It's the CFO, because they understand the value of having a great relationship with a customer and a loyal customer, because that leads to a better bottom line for the company. And you know what? That's exactly what they're doing. They're focusing on those goals of tying that improved experience to bottom line revenue. Okay? We've done a number of different studies that say a better experience, believe it or not, leads to a better stock price on the New York Stock Exchange, on the S&P 500. Studies like that prove that a customer experience is a crucial part of every business. But what is it? What is it about customer experience? What's the most important part there? And really what it comes down to is the intelligence, because it's the customer intelligence applications that are critical for making this all work. Why is that? Well, because we live in a digital world now. It used to be when you walked into the donut shop downtown and you knew the person behind the counter. They knew how you liked your coffee and what your favorite donut was. You probably even knew what time you were going to be there. Or you walked into the grocery store and they knew exactly what it is you wanted. I mean, the butcher shop, all these things. When we used to be a person-to-person, a P2P world, whether we innately realized it or not, we were gathering intelligence about our customers. Okay. I remember when I was young, when my grandma got sick, it was kind of interesting. She got sick and was put into the hospital, and I went to visit her, and I was, she had flowers all over her room and stuff. And I was, surprised. I didn't realize grandma had such a big circle of friends. There was this huge, beautiful bouquet. You got to remember, this was back in the late 70s, early 80s. Big, beautiful bouquet sitting there. And I said, oh, I was surprised. I said, did Grandpa send that to you? And she said, no, Grandpa didn't send that to me. Well, that kind of surprised me. So I was curious. So I looked at the card. It was from the manager of her local Safeway, a grocery store we had in town. Why? Because he knew her and he knew how much she came in and spent, not only for her, but for her church. She was constantly buying groceries there for the church. That's the kind of relationship that we used to have when it was person to person. Now we don't have that. It's a digital world. We're buying things online. Like, for example, I just bought a new sleeping bag today online from REI. I need that kind of experience. I need that relationship there. So it comes down to the customer intelligence that we can gather either directly or indirectly and contextually about the customer. Why? Because it leads to a better experience. When we look at the business drivers for using AI, and we'll use AI as an indicator for customer intelligence, the reason companies are investing in artificial intelligence right now, over 50% of them said because it leads to a better customer experience. Yes, there's employee productivity and things like that. But if you go down a little further, almost 50% said higher competitiveness, market gains, drive top line revenue growth, down at the very bottom, almost at 40%, higher margins. All those lead back to gathering and using intelligence about the customer and bringing that forward into the different processes and systems. And before we go on, I want to take a step back, because generally at this point, this is where people get confused and they say, okay, this is all about marketing. No, it's not all about marketing. Customer experience stretches end to end of the organization. So for example, if your contact center doesn't have good customer intelligence, you don't know how to support your customers. If your loyalty team doesn't have good customer intelligence, then they don't know how to properly support your most loyal customers. Let's just be honest. If your product design and innovation teams don't have good customer intelligence, then they can't design the next generation of the products your customers are going to want. Okay? If your finance department doesn't have good customer intelligence, then they're not going to be able to appropriately set up expectations for credit scores and things like that with their customers. So it's not just about marketing. It's not just about sales. Customer experience touches every part of the organization. And because it does, customer intelligence touches every part of the organization. When we looked at the digital transformation for customer intelligence and analytics segments from 2020 to 2022, we said, what are the switches going to be, and what are companies expecting to switch? And, some of the biggest areas for switching were customer service, marketing, and sales. In reading this chart, what you'll see is that, customer service all of a sudden from 2020 to 2022 goes from 39%, top two box, to over 48%. So that's a 23% growth. What that means is that businesses realize that we've gone through a shift, that we need to invest more in customer service, specifically customer intelligence and analytics for customer service. Obviously with marketing, as customers, finite number, 34% to over 53%. We're looking at a 55% growth rate there in marketing. And again, sales, what some people consider one of the oldest professions in the world, sales has got to grow, and it's 26%. What this tells us is that across the board, across the customer touching business functions, everybody is investing in better customer intelligence and analytics, because it's critical to the success of the customer and how this all goes together. So let's talk a little bit about where the future is going. What's technology's role is specific customer intelligence and analytics. One of the things that IDC goes through every year is we go through what's called a futurescape effort, and we come up with predictions based upon our experience talking to vendors, talking to end user customers about where the future is going to go and what things are going to look like. And there are two that I think are really relevant that'll get published in our futurescape that comes out in October. And the first one is that very soon, next year, by 2021, 65% of organizations will have shifted to a digital-first mentality through automated operations and contactless experiences as physical interactions become an amenity of the past. Think about that for a minute. I don't know how many of you have been into a restaurant post-COVID, and the ability to actually talk to a waitress is just an amazing experience, because it's like, oh my God, there's another person behind that mask. And it's like, we actually get to have those interactions. I went out to a restaurant here locally not that long ago, and they were actually using robots as their waiters, little robots that would go around and take your order. And you don't even have a menu anymore. You scan a QR code, so you look at the menu on your phone and you tell the robot what you want, and it comes back 3 minutes later, 4 minutes later with your drinks, and then it comes back about another 10, 15 minutes later with your food. It was pretty cool. The robot didn't get any of my jokes like a waitress would, but it was pretty cool, to go through. But here's the fact, is that post-COVID and into the future world, those physical interactions have become an amenity. So organizations need to shift to this digital first world. And the way they do that is through automated operations and contactless experiences. To be successful in that requires customer intelligence and analytics. It requires a deep understanding and knowing of who the customer is and where they're going. The second one, though, is really interesting, and it's that by 2023, just a couple of years from now, enterprises that excel at empathy and personalization at scale will outperform those that don't by 40%. So break that down a little bit. We're talking about a company that goes from 1,000 to 2,000. Instead, is growing at 40% more because they excel at empathy and personalization. How do you get empathy and personalization? It's only through understanding the customer. And it's about getting that direct feedback from the customer. It's about getting that indirect feedback from the customer, both quantitative and qualitative. And we used to joke about, survey type research and survey, about the customer was the bastard child of marketing. And it's really not. It's the most critical piece now going forward. This is really the future and the foundation of customer experience. And I want to leave you with 3 recommendations as I close out and turn it over to David. The first one is that I know I've talked a lot about the B2C world, but don't think this is just B2C. This is really B2B too, because as our organizations become smarter, it goes from B2B and B2C to B2P, business to person. I've already seen examples of technologies that can look into a B2B relationship in an organization, figure out who is in the buying decision process on the other side of a B2B relationship, and then specifically target them with the right kinds of marketing and information to help them make that decision. And this is all being done through analytics and intelligence. There is no other way to do this. Of course, data is a key piece of this, but let's be honest, the data is out there. And so this is one of the first big ones. The second one is that as an end user organization, you have to look towards the next stage customer experiences. Okay. Personalization is great until you get a letter in the mail that's personalized wrong. Then it's not so great. Okay. I don't know how many times I've gotten letters in the mail that are highly personalized, but they misspelled my name. It's like, come on, it's not that hard. It only has 1 L and 2 B's. You should be able to figure it out. Okay. Those are not good personalization efforts, okay? That personalization is going to be eclipsed by experiences that are contextual. They understand where I'm at that point in my life. They understand where I'm at that day, what's going on, and that are empathetic, that understand where I'm coming from. This is critical. So this is really, when you purchase technologies, you've got to be looking beyond personalization to empathy and context. Lastly, you've got to be able to enhance your customer experiences throughout, the whole customer journey using customer intelligence, analytics, and AI. The smarter you are about your customers, the better experience you can provide them. And the only way you can do that is through customer intelligence, through analytics and the applications of AI. And that way you can direct that across all your customer-facing business processes to really differentiate the experience you're providing your customers. So, Jeannie, thank you so much for giving me the time to do this and talk to everyone. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. That was such an insightful presentation. I really love the impact of customer experience, especially the business goals of the company. That was amazing. Now I'd like to turn it over to the Alchemer CEO, David Roberts, to get his perspective. David?
Thank you, Jeannie. And thank you, Alan. From the first time that you and I met each other, probably shortly after I joined Alchemer, I've really appreciated our dialogue and interactions, and glad we get to do this again today. So I'm going to share a little bit about Alchemer, and I think there's so many parallels around what Alan talked about and how that ties into what we're doing at Alchemer. Just to start, I'm David Roberts, I'm the CEO, and I'll tell you, my first 2 decades in business, nearly 2 decades, were at Accenture, where I was a founding member of our CRM, or Customer Relationship Management practice. And back then, we used to talk a lot about getting closer to your customer. After all, CRM starts with customer. Although what really drove our CRM practice and the way a lot of businesses thought about CRM was about how internal processes worked and how adherence worked. You know, whether it's Salesforce automation systems or whether it's marketing systems, they're really geared around how the internal business operation runs. And here at Alchemer, we think things can be very, very different, that you can build truly customer-centric organizations and you can pull your customer really close to how you run your business. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about Alchemer and picking up where Alan left off. First, we believe very strongly that CX, voice of the customer platforms, really help you immensely get much closer to your customer and build customer-centric organizations. And Alan, I love the way you talk about building empathetic organizations and really thinking about what that customer's doing and how they're behaving. We believe that the only way to do that is to listen to each instance of what that customer is telling you. Many other organizations will focus on aggregated reporting and roll-ups. We think the voice of the customer is really lost when you do that. And instead of building dashboards and aggregated reports, which we also provide at Alchemer, what's really important is that you take each of those voices and you're able to run, as you described it, automated operations off the back of what that customer is telling you. So I'm going to go into more detail about that, but we think customer-centric organizations depend heavily on that as a core foundation. So the failed approach that we see is that CX platforms have really taken an approach that we don't think allows you to be an empathetic organization, to build a customer-centric culture. They've been controlled and proprietary. They've focused on dashboards and analysis. And while those things are all part of the equation, at Alchemer, we think about it differently. We think about going from controlled to democratized, to really empowering every part of your business to engage with the customer right at the front line, to hear what they're saying and to be able to act on the cues that they're sending. Second, we think going from proprietary to being part of an ecosystem is critical. At Alchemer, we want to be part of how a company or an organization engages that customer. Not the only platform, but part of that ecosystem that allows you to collect the best feedback, allows you to workflow it, and allows you to engage in all the systems you already use today to connect with your customer. We think that dashboards really need to be more about focus on workflow. And finally, analysis needs to be all about action. And that action, taking action on what each customer tells you, means you're way more connected to what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and that they hear specific response to what feedback they're providing you. So our approach at Alchemer is to be able to take great feedback collected well through audience that's well understood, workflow it to systems you're already using today, and being able to connect it throughout the organization and communicating well through video, through text, through type and click, as we've often described it. All those different channels are critically important, and I'll describe those a little bit more as well. So many of our customers are in market research, and many of the people who likely signed up for this webinar are in market research. And we think market research is critically important, but our approach to it is a little bit different than maybe how you've thought about it in the past. So first, we think that organizations need to do a great job of really learning, understanding all the signals that customers are telling them, and taking systems of insight like social media, like panel services, like various communication methods, Slack, MailChimp, SendGrid, Twitter, Sint and Lucid, All these different platforms are telling you what your customers are doing and what they're thinking. And I think the model of old was to take all that, roll it all up, try to aggregate it into dashboards, have business analysts sit and plow through it and really understand what the trends and themes are, to build dashboards that then project managers go out back through the organization and operation and try to drive change back out based on trends and themes that they see back into what we call the systems of execution. So going from learning to doing, going from system insights to systems of execution, going from places like Facebook or Slack to systems like Salesforce or HubSpot or Workday or Zendesk. We think that's the key, but we don't think that the way you do that is by rolling it all up, trying to centralize all the understanding and then distributing it all back out again. We think that it's a little different. We think that the market research function, the design function really needs to be at the front end to build that personalization model, to build a framework that means that collection ends up in systems of execution. So our hypothesis would be do all that work up front and then build the workflows and the systems and the engagement that means you can take what a customer shares with you, the insights they provide to you, and immediately route it into how your organization already handles customer requests today. So use to engage in sales motions, use HubSpot to engage in marketing motions, use Zendesk or Service Cloud to support your contact centers or your customer success operations, and have the feedback that's being provided by your customer immediately routed to those systems, picked up by the people whose job it is to serve those customers every day, and engage with them immediately. Afterwards, you can certainly look for trends and themes and reporting that tells you what's going on at the macro level. But in order to build empathy, in order to really personalize and engage, we think it's critically important that each piece of feedback is acted upon and it's routed into the systems that help organizations do that. So surveys are a big part of that. Listening, engaging, getting feedback back from your customers. But too often that survey data is rolled up into a dashboard and no one does much with it. We think that's treating feedback like lead, not like gold. And we think that there's some magic in how you take that feedback and drive it through the rest of your organization. So at Alchemer, we provide a whole bunch of different products and services, certainly surveying, which is part of our roots, but we provide workflow products. We allow you to engage an audience, either audience you've already identified or audience that you want to access that you don't know how to access today. We think you ought to communicate to them in lots of different ways: email, SMS, video, audio, notifications. And our product allows you to do that at every part of the interaction. And finally, yes, analysis, BI tools, and reporting is really important, either within our product or integrating to great other products like Power BI or Tableau or other BI platforms that you use today in your enterprise. But it's all those pieces together that, used in combination, allow you to solve for a specific business use case. And I'll go into one of those in a bit more detail. So Alan talked about NPS. A lot of our customers talk about NPS. It stands for Net Promoter Score. And it's basically a simple tool that allows customers to tell companies how likely they are to recommend a product or service. We recently hired a new CFO, and I'll tell you, I interviewed a bunch of them. And I asked every one of them how NPS data was used within their organizations today. Almost all of them tell a story that you might be familiar with. It gets rolled up at quarterly all-hands meetings. It gets shared. People put together pie charts and graphs to show what's going on with their NPS data. And then you don't really hear much about it again until the next quarterly all-hands meeting. We think there's a very different way. At Alchemer, and for many, many of our customers, we take that NPS score and we do things with it. Every single score that comes back. If you rate us a 9 or a 10, we ask you to go out and share with industry analysts like IDC, with G2, with Capterra, and we say, if you really like us and you're really a great supporter, please go tell the world about us, which we think is marketing automation driven directly off of NPS scores. Regardless of what you say, if you provide commentary, we turn that into a service ticket, and one of our support heroes follows up and makes sure the customer hears back directly on every comment they provide back. We think that's about personalization. We think that's about empathy. We think that's how you create a great customer experience. And then sales as well. And Alan showed a chart about marketing, about sales, and about service. We find that if you're a promoter, you actually renew with us at a pretty high rate. If you're a detractor, you also renew with us pretty well, oddly. What's different is if you're a passive, a 6 or a 7, you don't renew as well. And that's because you don't have a strong feeling one way or another. And we use that data to feed into our Salesforce implementation, and our account managers follow up with customers to engage them more deeply when they come back and tell us they're passive. So in this instance, NPS isn't just a score. It's not just a pie chart. We're not just looking at themes and trends about why people rate us one way or another. We're actually driving marketing automation, service automation, sales automation in each instance of feedback that a customer provides us to make sure that customer hears from us and that they know that we're responding to their feedback. We have many customers who've done the same and have seen great results. They've seen higher renewal rates and they've seen higher revenue as a direct result of managing their NPS score more proactively. So as one of Alan's charts illustrated, you can see really direct and meaningful business results that your CFO, your CEO, your head of sales, your head of customer success care about, because you're not just managing things centrally, you're distributing feedback all over the enterprise and engaging each customer directly. And then finally, we've got some badges that Finances Online and that G2 have shared with us. We get great feedback from our customers. I put this up just to share what I'm most proud of, the highest user adoption and the most implementable software. We believe that these badges really are around driving direct results and impact over your voice of the customer or CX programs, and that Alchemer is the company that helps you be able to do that in a very direct and meaningful way. So tying back to what Alan said as well, empathy and personalization really important to us. Automated operations off of what customers are telling you is critically important. And being an empathetic enterprise is what makes all the difference to your customers and to whether they stay with you long term and whether they continue to buy and expand their business with you. So with that, Jeannie, we've got a link here if people want to follow up and hear more. IDC event at alchemer.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to be able to turn this now over to our customers and prospects who may have questions for either one of us. So Jeannie, back to you again.
Thank you so much, David. I love being part of an organization that is really helping customers to change the way they think and to move to a customer-centric organization. With that, we will move to Q&As, and it looks like we already have some good questions. And I just want to give a quick reminder to David and Alan to unmute and make sure your video is back on. All right, our first question goes to Alan. Can you define what you mean by journeys? Are these digital, physical, and omni-channel? Is it a certain moment in their lives?
Wow, what a great question. And I wish there was a simple answer to that, but there's really not. I mean, a lot of it depends upon the industry and the product, but generally the journey is the end-to-end lifetime relationship a brand has with a customer. Probably the best example I have of that is lately, we had to buy a new car, bought a new Honda CR-V for my daughter. And, there's the advertising marketing on the front end, but there's also the sales process, getting it all ready, customer support when we didn't know how some of the devices inside the car worked, and then taking it in to get it serviced and the oil change. That's all part of the customer journey. That's all part of the customer relationship. And that's why there should be data and information gathered across that whole process to feed it back in. So companies like the Honda dealership that I bought mine from know how well they're doing and where they could improve. So there's not just one point, but it really is both physical and digital. It's across all channels, and it's across the totality of that lifetime relationship with that customer.
Great, really interesting question. All right, our next one is for David. We run NPS surveys twice a year and report on them at company meetings. How would you recommend retraining our organization and really changing the culture to achieve that level of immediate action based on NPS activity?
Well, I think, Jeannie, I talked a bit about that. I think that NPS can be a really valuable tool. It doesn't have to be NPS. It could be any form of customer satisfaction used to get feedback from your customers. But the culture of presenting results at all hands meetings, it's interesting. And I think it's important to get the whole company tied into what a customer thinks of your business. But what I'd rather, what I love our customers, many of our customers do, is when they actually share the results that that NPS or customer satisfaction data has on how they responded to customers and how they serve them better. So, sharing the stories as we do of what a customer told us during one of those interactions and how we responded and surprised them by meeting their needs through an NPS survey. It's that operationalizing the data that's really important.
Great, thank you. Here's a good question that came from one of the attendees. And this is, I'd like actually input from both of you. We'll start with Alan. You've talked about customer experience touches so many parts of an organization, including sales, the call center, branding, finance. How does a large organization integrate those into a single customer experience? Should one department lead it? Should companies have a customer experience czar?
So we, for a long time, CX has been kind of led by the CMO, because if we start out and say, okay, the CEO is responsible for customer experience, then what that means is the CEO is essentially responsible for everything. And, that generally doesn't work. So in most cases, it's been pushed down to the CMO. But that's changing. We do see organizations that have customer experience officers, chief customer experience officers, or chief customer officers. But the issue with that is that they're not always integrated into the business processes and the flow of an organization. So here's generally what happens with a CX initiative. When it starts in a line of business somewhere. That may be in a contact center, that may be in marketing, that may be someplace else. That's where the budget for the first year for that comes from, maybe the second year. But a lot of times that CX initiative at the end of the second year, it gets pushed off into another area. Specifically, if it's in technology, it goes over to the CIO. So the CIO has more of a role on that. What we've seen though is that as these have come, as these types of projects have been pushed off more and things, the one role that's really getting much more involved is the CFO. The CFO and the CIO are really the only two roles in an organization that can see end to end on the organization. And the CFO is the one who's really looking to see what is the impact of a customer experience on the bottom line. So more and more, we're seeing the CFO taking on kind of a role of the chief customer experience officer.
And Jeannie, I'll share, and Kyle, thanks for the question. I think we believe pretty strongly in a democratized approach to engaging customers. We think our platform allows every part of the business, no matter where you are. It could be in inventory management, to be able to engage the customer and run your part of the business better as a result of that. I think a CXR, if an organization creates a center of excellence or a CXR, what they're doing is training and empowering and helping all the other parts of their business solve their own problems. Some companies take the approach that everything needs to roll up to that centralized group, get analyzed, get understood, and then rolled back out again. I think that's not the right approach, especially as millennials make up more and more of the workforce. You guys want to have a direct impact, and you want to be able to solve problems at the front line. And that's more of our methodology, that centralized group, that center of excellence, or that CXR is more training, empowerment, and not control and centralization.
Great, thank you both. This next one is for David. Can you provide some solid steps and tips on how to turn customer experience analytics into action?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And I'm looking out here on the chat as well, and people are asking about our new name, which I'd love to share about as well. But so, and this may be some examples that Rebel asked about too. We've got a lot of great examples where people use feedback and engage their customer in their own business process. So I think, Catherine, this answers your question as well. But we work with a major oil company that uses our product to drive health, safety, and environment. They allow employees out all over the enterprise to report issues they see around safety. And they automatically route that to the vendors who are responsible for addressing those issues. And they've seen their safety incidents drop significantly as a result. They've also signed the mean time to resolution from 2 weeks to 2 hours, which is unbelievable. We have examples. There's an aircraft manufacturer who uses our product to schedule aircraft service, and they make sure that all the parts are provisioned automatically based on the input that their customer gives them about what they need done to their aircraft. They close the loop once the aircraft's left the hangar and gone back out again to make sure that that customer feels like everything has been done correctly with their aircraft. We've got companies that use us to drive selection of products when they're shipping things out to them. So it really feels more like you're engaging your customer in your business process and not like you're just surveying them. And that really gets to the question about our name. You know, the only problem we had with Survey Gizmo was survey and gizmo. Survey really limited people and how they thought about us, and Gizmo made us feel like a toy and not like a substantial part of how a business runs their customer-facing operations. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the name that really embodied that. And while Alchemer doesn't explicitly say what we do, we really love that it's still fun. It's about turning lead into gold. And for us, we think a lot of customers have treated feedback like lead and not like the gold it can be for their organization. So we're excited about the name change. We hope that you guys really like it. Survey Gizmo was fun, and a lot of our employees were really connected to it. But as much as I hated the idea of changing our name, we felt like it was important.
Great, thank you, David. And great job pulling all those name change questions into one good response.
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie.
Let's take this next one for Alan. Enterprise is really interesting to me, especially when engaging with the customer. What is the best way to start that path towards becoming an empathetic enterprise? How do you bring together the right team members, which we've talked about a little bit, but how do you really get that initiative started?
So it really starts, this is going to sound strange, but it really starts both from the top down and the bottom up. The companies that I've seen successful at this so far have started at the CEO and the board level. And at the same time, they've built a culture that says this is important for their companies. You know, probably if you're in the outdoor space, and I know with David and his team being located in Colorado, they'll know this company, my old home state, but there's a company out there called Patagonia. And we used to joke about it, you know, everybody called it Patagucci because it was expensive to buy and stuff, but it was really good stuff. But if you've ever interacted and engaged with Patagonia, from Yvon Chouinard, the CEO and the founder, on down to everybody, they have a culture that they've built that's specifically around customer experience, because they look at themselves as being their own customers for their products and services. And so I think that's really where it starts at. The other thing that I think is critical about this is that you have to think about this as a relationship. It's not simply a bottom line profit number, but it's a relationship. And if you remember way back when, there was an old book out there called 5 Love Languages. And I always joked about writing a book called 5 Customer Languages, because there really is 5 customer languages that are out there. And you have to be able to speak the customer's language and relate and connect to them. In a world that's awash in channels and technology, you have to be able to use technology to do that. And that really comes down to data, intelligence, and action. And so if you take it down to those basics, say, do we have a culture that's set up for this? And then do we have the intelligence, the data, and the action to make it a reality? that's generally a good starting point. For companies who have not grown up with this, like Patagonia did, it generally starts in one division or one group, and they'll start building it out based upon their leadership. And people will look at the success and they'll say, how do we do that? And then it grows from there. It's probably one of the hardest cultural changes an organization can go through.
Very interesting. All right, our next question goes to David. I love the changing the thinking graphic, but I'd like a little bit more detail about how exactly Alchemer fits into this model. David, can you give us a little bit more detail about that?
I think it's certainly possible to continue to do things the way I showed in the original chart, which is collect all the data, roll it up into the dashboards. What we do as humans in order to understand large amounts of data is we categorize. We all do it. Look at your kitchen drawers. We categorize, right? We put things in places so we can remember how to get to them. And what technology allows us to do is to get way beyond categorization. It allows us to actually take every piece of feedback and route it to the place that can address it best. If you do analysis in between learning and doing, or systems of insight and systems of execution, if you roll things up, if you categorize things, you lose fidelity, you lose empathy, you lose the ability to understand that customer in a really intimate way. So what we suggest instead is all that great thinking can go into the design of the customer system, into how you think about connecting the feedback with the execution. And you do all that analysis and you recognize those patterns in order to design your customer system, rather than using it to present fancy dashboards. And we all like a good dashboard. I've got my own. I happen to be a huge fan of Domo. If I'll just tip my hand a bit, I look at my Domo charts all the time. But what really gets me excited, maybe it's my Accenture training, is to see systems, business systems, really engage customers and engage employees. And that's what I think the big difference is, Jeannie.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for about one more question. I'm going to direct this one to Alan. You've talked quite a bit about the impact of customer experience on business outcomes and things like reducing churn. We currently have lifetime value, but what are some other metrics that you would recommend that could be used to measure mutual trust and predictable communication and some of those other aspects?
Well, right now, we're actually in the process of designing an empathy index. It's called the Empathy Enterprise Index, that's going to allow us to actually measure that. And it's going to look at the gap between where a company's at and where their customers think they're at. And it goes into a lot more factors than, say, like NPS and scores like that. Every time you take a score, it's simply a snapshot in time. For example, right now we're in the middle of the political season with the upcoming election. You look at all the polls, they're simply a snapshot in time, and it's the same with an NPS score or anything else. And the one that I really like the most, that I think gives the most insight from a quantitative perspective, is actually customer satisfaction scores. And I like the whole concept around NPS, but I tend to go back to customer sat scores just to simply see what's going on and why. Because I think there's a level of detail there and a level of understanding that we don't get from a lot of other scoring options out there. And let's just be honest. I mean, we have a hard time understanding what our relationships are like with other people. Why would we expect a relationship between a company and a customer to be any different? It's difficult, and things change all the time. And so that's why I think it's so important that this is a constant process of listening, of learning, of understanding context, and then acting upon what it is to keep that relationship with that customer solid. A lot of times it's the little things, not the big things, but the little things. One of the things that I share is that, I'm an analyst, so I'm a little ornery just by my very nature. And so when I get on a chat bot with a bot, I always ask it, are you a bot? Just to see what the programmers put in it, just to see what comes back. And I had one a couple of years ago that was amazing. I put it in, I said, are you a bot in the chat? And it came back and said, yes, but like Pinocchio, someday I hope to be a little boy. And, let's set aside the child labor laws and things like that. The fact that some company had gone through and thought that out and put that in there, that was an amazing connection immediately that I had made to that company, because they made it human. They put that connection in there and they knew it was coming. I mean, it's a simple thing. People are going to ask. They knew, and they responded appropriately. And I really think that's the most important part. And that's the only thing that really ties that to you is customer satisfaction scores.
Very cool. All right. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining our webinar today. Great presentations from both Alan and David, and really interesting follow-up questions from everyone. You will all be receiving a link to the webinar recording, as well as an IDC white paper, Alchemer Extends Its Customer Experience Intelligence Reach. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to idcevent@alchemer.com. Thanks again to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.